Hello, my name's Sam and welcome to my studio. Have you ever tried painting outdoors? It's really good fun and it really improves your painting. Just recently I went on a road trip to Fiordland National Park in New Zealand. I took my paints with me and painted some mountain views. In this video I'm going to show you how to paint a mountain landscape painted outdoors on location. Check out the link below for the written tutorial that accompanies this video, which is available from my website. I hope you enjoy this video. Fiordland National Park is located in the south of New Zealand. It's characterised by high mountains, native beech tree forests and mountain streams, which are all great subjects for painting outdoors. Painting outdoors, or plein air painting, is a totally different experience to painting in the studio. Firstly, the light changes, and often quicker than you think. The weather conditions change. 1 minute is sunny, the next a huge thick cloud forms, it starts raining, the wind picks up and blows over all your equipment, which has happened to me on a few occasions. So, if you're new to painting outdoors, it's best to go out on a sunny day when it's not too windy. Now let me just briefly go over the equipment and paints that I'll be using. I'm using a Pochard box easel which mounts on a camera tripod. The Pochard box is especially designed for outdoor painting. The paints I'm using are Langridge handmade oils, and the colours I'll be using are titanium white, cadmium yellow deep, yellow oxide, burnt sienna, burnt umber, cadmium red light, quinacridone magenta, ultramarine blue, cobalt teal and phthalo green. When painting outdoors, it's best to choose a subject where you can create a good composition. I've chosen this mountain view because I like the contrast between the dark shadows in the mountains and the areas bathed in light. I also like the mountain stream which leads towards Mount Talbot in the distance, which will be the focal point of my painting. It's always a good idea to have contrast between light and shadow in your painting. It makes it look more realistic, it's easier to paint, and it also adds more drama and atmosphere to your painting. After setting up my Pochard box easel and choosing my subject, I now begin the painting. I'm painting on a 20 by 30 cm canvas panel, which I prepared earlier in the studio. I also applied a layer of burnt umber, which helps to warm up the painting as it comes through the paint layers. It also makes it easier for the establishment of colour and tone, as there's less of a distorting effect, which can result from painting on a white surface. I begin sketching up the scene with titanium white mixed with quinacridone magenta and liquin. Liquin's a really useful medium to use for plein air painting as it speeds up the drying. Given that the light is going to change, and so could the weather, I need to work quickly. Using a flat bristle brush, I start painting the sky, which I mix using cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, cobalt teal and titanium white. Now, one of the great things about painting outdoors is it teaches you to paint quickly. It also lends itself to a looser, much more impressionistic style, which is great if you're a studio painter like myself, whose work is normally more detailed. I use the sky to gauge the tonality of the rest of the painting, and once established, I need to get my dark tones in as quickly as possible, then it doesn't matter if the light or the weather conditions change. Next, I start painting the shadows of the mountains. Now, one thing I've noticed is the light in New Zealand is much stronger than the light in Europe, and distant landforms such as hills and mountains can often fade out into a vibrant blue. Painting on this day was no exception, so I mixed the colours of the mountains by using cobalt teal mixed with quinacridone magenta and titanium white. I then round off the mixture with some cobalt blue. The combination of these two colours forms a nice blue-violet colour, as the green in the cobalt teal, being the opposite on the colour wheel to the red in the quinacridone magenta, cancel each other out. I use the same colour combination for the shadows in Mount Crosscut, the bigger mountain on the right. If I feel that the colours are becoming too saturated, I can reduce the saturation by adding some burnt umber to the mix. Next, I establish the tree and rock shadows that are in the foreground. My shadows will be at their darkest in the foreground and highlights at the lightest, as the tonal range is at its highest. However, for distant objects, the tonal range is much narrower, so darks aren't quite dark and lights aren't quite light, and so these colours fall between the light to mid-tone area of the scale. I mix the rock shadows with ultramarine blue and burnt umber, which forms a near black, and for the trees I'm using the same colours, but I also add a little phthalo green to the mix and a tiny bit of titanium white. So now that I've established all my dark tones, I can now start working on the areas of light. And this is good actually, because at the point in the painting it started to cloud over a little bit, but it didn't matter because I'd already got my dark tones in. I start painting the sunlit faces of Mount Talbot, the mountain in the distance, which is also the focal point of the painting. And I mix the colours using ultramarine blue, burnt umber and titanium white. For the larger mountain on the right, I add a little more burnt umber and a little less titanium white into the mix, as this mountain sits in the midground, so therefore the saturation of the colour increases. I start painting the greens of the foliage in the distant mountains. I have to bear in mind that green really doesn't travel well over long distances, so I need to keep my colour totally desaturated. Greens can be a tricky colour to work with because our eyes trick us into thinking that it's more green than it actually is. So to mix a distant green, I use yellow oxide, ultramarine blue and lots of titanium white, and I also add a little burnt sienna. When it's mixed on the palette it looks like a dirty grey, but when it's placed next to the blue of the mountain it has the appearance of it being green. Next I establish the trees and the foliage in the foreground by mixing cadmium yellow deep, ultramarine blue, titanium white and a little phthalo green, which really kicks up the saturation of the colour. I can also add a little burnt sienna or quinacridone magenta just to earth the green a bit more. I'm beginning to refine the shadows in the mountains. I also paint some reflected light as well. I paint the water of the mountain stream using the same colours I use for the sky mix, but with much less titanium white. I bear in mind that the water mostly reflects the sky, so I want to use the same colours. Here I'm painting the highlights of the boulders and rocks in the mountain stream, and I'm using ultramarine blue, burnt umber, titanium white and a little yellow oxide just to warm it up. I'm at the point in the painting now where I'm getting ready to add the final elements that will make the whole painting come alive. I paint the areas of snow that are in shadow by mixing cobalt blue, ultramarine blue and titanium white. And now for the fun part, painting the snow on the top of the mountains. Now I have to bear in mind that the snow on the distant mountains is much further away, so I don't want it to come too far forward in the painting because it is still tonally very light. So I add a little bit of burnt umber to the mix and, if necessary, a tiny bit of ultramarine blue. And that will just make it recede a bit more so it doesn't come too far forward in the painting. Even when painting the snow on Mount Crosscut, the large mountain on the right, I don't opt for pure titanium white straight from the tube. I still want to reduce the tone a little, so at the end of the painting I can add my lightest tones, and then that will make the snow look a bit more three-dimensional. So for the moment I still add a tiny amount of burnt umber, ultramarine blue and quinacridone magenta into the mix. At this stage of the painting I'm just refining the image, re-establishing the shadows in the trees and the foliage that's in light. And because I've been using liquid, it's already started to dry a little, which means I can rework some of these areas. I got to a stage in the painting where the rocks in the bottom left hand corner weren't really working too well and it was getting a bit confusing on the eye. When painting outdoors it's always best to simplify the image, so with an old rag I wiped off the paint and repainted some of those rocks. I also added some grass into the foreground to add some interest to the painting. I mixed the colours for the moss on the rocks using cadmium yellow, cadmium red light, ultramarine blue and titanium white. To give the illusion of a bright sunny day in the mountains, I add sparkles to the water by using pure titanium white straight from the tube. With a large bristle brush, I use pure titanium white and make some random brush marks in the sky just to give the illusion of a little hazy cloud. Using pure titanium white mixed with a tiny amount of yellow oxide, I apply the highlights to the snow in the mountains. And here you can see that the snow that I'd painted earlier is actually tonally a little darker than the highlights I'm adding now. It's always best to save your lightest tones to the end of the painting, as that really makes it come alive. The last part of the painting is spent just making a few refinements and adjustments, which is usually the case when you paint outdoors. So to recap on the painting, what have we learned today? Well, painting outdoors is really good fun, and it really does help with your studio painting, as you definitely learn things outside that you probably wouldn't necessarily learn in the studio. If you're new to painting outdoors, try and pick a day when it's sunny and there's not a lot of wind, just to make the conditions easier. Paint a view where you can create a good composition. Also, choose a view with lots of shadows as well as light, as this will be easier to paint and will make your painting look more realistic. And one of the most important things about painting outdoors, whether you start by painting the sky or not, it's always a good idea to get your dark tones and shadows in as quickly as possible. That way it doesn't matter if the light changes. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the information in this video useful. If you have any questions about painting outdoors, please leave them in the comment section below and I'll answer them as best I can. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Also, check out the link below for the written tutorial that accompanies this video, which is available from my website. Thanks again, and stay tuned for the next video, which will be coming soon.